In order to write successfully, you need a good vocabulary. You also need to have a number of good ideas in order to explain what you're trying to write. For example, on the scholarship exam, you're going to have a number of options. For example, if you look at the sheet that's in front of you, you'll notice it's an illustration. In this case, it's a man holding a cup begging for money. Now, the student essay that we have in front of us is a reasonably good essay. It's not fantastic, but it would receive a decent mark. If we look at the marks from, say, 10, this would probably receive around a 7, which is above average. Average is around 6.5. Anything below that is below average. So if you look at the opening of this particular piece, the writer is basically put forward a view straight away. Now we know with his words here, he uses words such as dawdled, sauntered, and so forth. Again, we've got this nice sort of rhythm of language being used. The story also has a nice beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. That's very important. So what we have with this particular story, as you can see, is a man who is down on his luck. He's begging for money, so he's extremely poor. He's finally given some money. He spends this money rather poorly and then ends back poor again at the end of the story. So it may sound a little cliched, but in 15 minutes the student has done a good job, and he's managed to do that simply by making sure that the structure of the piece is well done. Certain words have been used rather well. For example, he says his ragged clothes smelled of oil, which drove even the most generous of people away. Now he's trying to create an image there, and that's a good thing to do. When it comes to your own writing, you need to create images within the reader's mind. If you do not do that, what you end up with is bland statements. They're not going to be successful. A bland statement, for example, would be, he walked down the street. Well, yes, it's a statement, but what's it actually saying? Does it create an image in the reader's mind? No, it doesn't. But this writer has attempted to do that by creating those images of language. Another element that he uses here along these lines is, for example, his cup in which he collected money was bare after the days of begging. He stared down at a puddle by his feet, full of mud and heaven knows what. So again, he's not just making a statement that the man is standing there poor. What he's trying to do is create these images, and by creating those images, he creates an idea in the reader's mind that we say, yes, this is fairly successful. Again, notice the writer doesn't use any large words. The language itself is appropriate for what he is writing, and that's where we look at it. And as I said, the ending of this particular piece is fairly good, because what he's done is gone through a circular process. So the character that he's written about begins in a fairly poor way and then ends up the same way at the end. So there is almost like a sort of moral to his story at the end. He says, "What point is there in soaring high like eagles only to be shot down? Next time." And it sort of ends, leaving the reader to make up their own mind about whether this character will eventually be successful. Now, so all of those sort of elements the writer has done well. So they're the key elements that you need to think about. The organisation of the writing is hugely important. If your writing is poorly organised and it does not have a beginning, a middle and an end, straight away you're in trouble. So what you need to do is, when it comes to the writing, your introduction to a creative piece should have an exposition. It prepares the way for what the story is going to be. Then the body paragraphs follow that, and it explains in greater detail. And then your conclusion to the piece should leave us going, yeah, I like that story. That actually works. And you do that simply, as I've said earlier, by creating images within the reader's mind, by choosing your language carefully. And that's one of the key things. You don't want to use bland statements. As I said, a bland statement will not work. If we were to say, for example, a bland statement would be something along the following lines again, just to give you an example of what I mean. So, George was cruel is a bland statement. It does not create any image within the reader's mind. So how do we improve something along those lines? Well, we could simply say something along the following lines. Now we're creating some kind of image straight away. So rather than a simple statement such as, George was cruel, doesn't do anything. But if we say something like, George had a disposition towards cruelty which made him unpopular with people, now we've got something. We can now expand on that. So don't leave any of your statements like this. You imagine an entire piece of writing with statements all the way through. What you're going to end up with is short sentences all the way through, or very long sentences, which is just as bad, but they're just going to be one comment after another. Therefore, your writing becomes flat and it becomes dull. And the moment that happens, you lose interest. And your reader says, no, the student's not showing a great deal of imagination. And that's what they're looking for. Remember, in the scholarship exam, you're up against a great number of people. So they're going to look at how you structure the piece, the language that you've used, your imagination, and all of those elements combined. Then the examiner will look at it and say, this student has achieved those goals. Those students who don't achieve those goals, well, they may be average sort of writing, but average, unfortunately, will not be sufficient for a scholarship. You have to be slightly above that average. And you can only do that by improving your vocabulary, making sure that you do create images within the writing itself, by making sure that the writing is well structured. The moment you do that, then you should be fairly well off. So be very careful when it comes to those sort of elements. As I said, this student has done most of these things extremely well, and therefore he has received an above average result. Again, read the piece carefully through again. Look at the way the student has used certain phrases all the way through, and say to yourself, yes, okay, it may not be as I said earlier, it may not be a fantastic piece of work, but remember, the student had 15 minutes to write this, and that's all. And therefore, in that 15 minutes, he has achieved what the examiners are looking for. And that's what genuinely counts. So, again, through the dialogue, through its writing, there's very few errors in there. There is the occasional grammatical error that occurs. But this could be put down to the student trying to create a piece of writing in 15 minutes. And therefore the examiner is probably not going to be as harsh by saying, okay, well, there is the occasional awkward grammatical sentence there. But there's no spelling errors, and that's another thing as well. So if you are a poor speller, then you certainly need to improve there. And only use words that you know that you can spell along those lines as well. There's nothing worse than an essay that abounds in spelling errors and grammatical errors. So you need to work on the basics as well. Make sure that you know that your sentence is well structured. Make sure that it does make grammatical sense. Make sure that the spelling is accurate. And make sure that the entire sentence makes perfect sense all the way through. If it doesn't, then again you're going to find yourself in some kind of trouble. And as I said, to simply reiterate on this particular piece that the student has written, he's done all of those things well because of the fact that his introduction paves the way for the story that he's going to tell. The body paragraphs are fairly well detailed. They're moving always forward to push the story forward. The ending is rather clever because it, again, ends where it began, and therefore we have this nice cycle of writing. So overall, the piece is successful, and it's successful because of those reasons that we've just discussed. So when it comes to your own writing, make sure that you follow similar guidelines, and you should always be reasonably well with the writing that you do. So until we meet another time, thank you.